32-year-old Tennessee man Michael D. Robinson shot his girlfriend's 18-year-old son over a $5 debt in the early morning hours of July the 12th of 2021. Robinson and Zakoon Harris had reportedly gotten into an argument outside the Memphis home where Zakoon's mother lived. Robinson at one point retrieved a shotgun from his car and fired at the teen once in the chest. He then moved his car a short distance from the house located on the 800 block of Randall Street. When police arrived, the victim was lying in a driveway, unresponsive, and was later pronounced dead at the scene. His mother, Consuela Harris, identified Robinson, her boyfriend, as the shooter when speaking with officers. The suspect was arrested and admitted to the shooting, according to a charging document. He was booked at the Shelby County Jail without bond. In June of 2022, a grand jury indicted Robinson on a first-degree murder charge. Because he was a repeat offender, the District Attorney's Special Prosecution Unit sought the maximum sentence. Robinson's criminal record included multiple drug charges, possession of a firearm, vandalism, and aggravated assault. Number 6. Gregory L Robertson. On August 11th of 2022, Oakland County Sheriff's deputies were called to a General Motors assembly plant in Orion Township, Michigan, where they found a man unconscious and bleeding. The deputies attempted to resuscitate 49-year-old Gregory L Robertson from Pontiac, but they were unsuccessful and Robertson was pronounced dead at the scene. Officers found the victim's fellow contracted cleaning service employee, Astrid Gijon Bushi, near the plant's loading dock. The 48-year-old Albanian national apparently surrendered himself and was charged with open murder. According to autopsy results, Robertson's death was ruled a homicide from multiple blows to the head. The police revealed that the altercation had centered around a small outstanding debt. A jury found Bushi guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree. 7 weeks later, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 5. Laura Ann Palmer, Teran Joseph Morrow, and Drake Duncan O'Neill. On September the 7th of 2019, a woman visited 35-year-old Laura Ann Palmer at an apartment near Tulsa, Oklahoma, in connection with $180 in outstanding debts. Palmer and 2 accomplices made sure the victim couldn't leave the flat located in the 1700 block of South Memorial Drive until the money was returned, according to a probable cause affidavit. The woman denied having taken anything, after which she had a gun pointed at her by one of the accomplices, later identified as 30-year-old Drake Duncan O'Neill. The latter reportedly threatened to kill her if the debt wasn't paid. He was then instructed by Palmer to have the woman searched in the bathroom. O'Neill subsequently assaulted the victim, and after he was done, the other accomplice, 44-year-old Teran Joseph Morrow, went into the bathroom and repeated the abuse. Palmer then allegedly entered the bathroom and inserted a gun into the victim's privates. She threatened to pull the trigger if the money wasn't returned and proceeded to torture the woman over the next 2 days. The victim was punched, sliced with a razor blade, doused in acid, and had a power tool drilled into her arm. She eventually managed to escape, at which point she reported the ordeal to local authorities. She reportedly had several large bruises, a bite mark on her upper body, a split upper lip, and 2 black eyes. When police went to the scene, the suspects were already gone, but they'd left behind a power drill and a black .22 caliber revolver. A police sergeant later said that it was the most brutal crime she'd ever seen perpetrated by a woman. On October the 27th of 2019, Morrow was arrested as part of a routine drug investigation in Medway, Maine. O'Neill was arrested under the same circumstances at a Gateway Inn in Maine 2 days later. Both suspects were later extradited back to Oklahoma. At around 10 p.m. on November the 2nd of 2019, Palmer was spotted in a vehicle in West Tulsa, whereupon she too was arrested. According to a case report, the suspects were sentenced for the crime on April the 19th of 2021. Palmer entered a plea of no contest and was convicted of possession of a firearm after a previous conviction of a felony and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Morrow pleaded guilty and was convicted of the same charge. O'Neill entered a guilty plea and was convicted of feloniously pointing a firearm. He was ordered to serve 4 years in the custody of the Department of Corrections. Number 4. Charlie Bates. On July the 31st of 2022, teenager Charlie Bates was stabbed in a car park in Radstock, Somerset, England, after an argument over a $24 debt. While Bates and his friends were on the benches near the parking lot at around 6:30 p.m., 2 vehicles pulled up to the area, according to an eyewitness. The victim approached one of the cars and spoke with the driver before a one-on-one fistfight suddenly broke out. A few more people from both parties ended up joining in until 18-year-old Joshua Del Bono came out of one of the cars with a knife and plunged it into Bates several times. Joshua and his group fled the scene and Bates was pronounced dead less than an hour later. The suspect headed straight into Shearwater near Warminster, where he disposed of the murder weapon and burned his clothes. He then went to his family's residence in Frome and confided in his sister about the attack. The sister later told their mother, Donna, who confronted Joshua in his room. He confessed to his mother, indicating he was scared and didn't know what to do. Donna told him that the only thing he could do was hand himself in to the authorities. She dialed 999 and reported that her son had killed someone.
Hi, I'm through.
Okay, what's happening?
My son's killed someone.
Okay, alright, okay. Can you tell me where?
It was at Radstock earlier. He's just come back. I've just found out he's in my house now, but I can't just let him go anywhere.
Does he know you're on the phone?
Yeah, he's here. I told him I've got to do it.
Joshua then got on the phone and claimed that he'd only joined the fight to help his friend and that he didn't know anything about the victim. A short time later, he was arrested and charged with murder. During the resulting trial in March of 2023, a friend of Bates, who was involved in the fight as well, appeared in Bristol Crown Court as a witness. According to his testimony, Joshua attempted to stab him with a rusty serrated blade. After he backed away and fell down, the next thing he saw was Bates being kicked and punched on the ground and then stabbed in the heart. A pathologist told the court that the victim had stab wounds to his chest and arm, which was consistent with self-defense. On April the 11th of 2023, Joshua was found guilty by a unanimous verdict and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Number 3. Jordan Marples Douglas. A small debt owed by 23-year-old Jordan Marples Douglas led to him being fatally stabbed on Woodthorpe Road in Sheffield, England on March the 6th of 2020. The attackers, 26-year-old Ben Jones and Ismail Mohamud Adan, had visited the victim's residence prepared for a fight. According to South Yorkshire Police, after they forcibly entered the home, they repeatedly stabbed Marples Douglas in the bedroom. A combination of internal injuries and loss of blood resulted in the victim's death. After the killing, the pair of suspects went back to a house owned by Jones's father, where they were reportedly heard talking about the incident. Upon the arrival of authorities at the scene, 2 knives with the victim's DNA were recovered, as well as a hat that belonged to Jones. On March the 10th, Jones was arrested while Adan had already fled the country with the aid of his girlfriend. The fugitive booked himself a flight to Somalia with his partner's bank card. During the proceedings for Jones's trial at Sheffield Crown Court, the prosecution said that the motive for the killing was a drug debt. After the 4-week trial, Jones was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. 22-year-old Dinah Awimrin, Adan's lover, was found guilty of assisting an offender and sentenced to 3 years behind bars. The latest updates on the matter seem to suggest that Adan remained on the run. Number 2. Gerardo Muñez de la Paz. On the morning of January the 29th of 2020, Texas authorities came upon a bullet-riddled body on the 20,900 block of Roberts Cemetery Road in Hockley. According to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office, members of law enforcement agencies were dispatched to the scene where the remains were recovered. The deceased was identified as 51-year-old Magnolia man Gerardo Muñez de la Paz. Detectives identified 39-year-old Melvin Giovanni Ramirez Russell as a suspect through video footage. He was arrested 2 days later without incident and admitted to fatally shooting de la Paz, who was his friend, and disposing of the body because the victim owed him over $700. In his confession, Ramirez Russell said that before he fired his gun, de la Paz had attacked him. The suspect was nevertheless charged with murder, tampering with evidence to conceal a human corpse, and tampering with evidence to impair an investigation. According to a statement by the district attorney's office, the victim was shot multiple times in the chest and left arm with a .38 caliber pistol at close range. 5 days later, 37-year-old Juan Manuel Amaya Pavon was also arrested for allegedly assisting the suspect with the disposal of the body. He was charged with tampering with evidence to conceal a human corpse. Ramirez Russell was held on a $410,000 bond, while Pavon's bail was set at $75,000. In the 221st District Court on August the 17th of 2020, Ramirez Roussel pleaded guilty and received a 45-year sentence. In case you missed our previous release about when fighting over money goes wrong, then we got that lined up for you right after number one. Number one, Alison McBlain. Alison McBlain and Christian Rivers were walking down the street in Blackburn, Lancashire, England, on November the 19th of 2020, when they were suddenly hit by a car. According to Lancashire police, a day prior to the incident, the pair had arranged to buy $80 worth of drugs from Dean Quayham and Caleb Connolly, who were members of a gang called Bully Line. When McBlain and Rivers made off without paying for the illicit merchandise, 21-year-old Quayham and Connolly, aged 19, plotted retaliation with their gang leader, 26-year-old John Chatwood. On the night of the attack at around 7:30 p.m., another member of Bully Line, 28-year-old Caris Poynton, saw McBlain in a pharmacy on King Street and phoned his accomplices. 10 minutes later, McBlain and Rivers were struck by the vehicle. The former left a shoe mark on the hood of the Fiat Punto after she was thrown across the front of the car, eventually landing 42 feet away on the pavement. The impact on the curb reportedly left the car with a deflated tire. Connolly, Quayham, and two other occupants abandoned the car after the collision and fled to Walsh Street, where Chatwood resided. Rivers survived the revenge attack, but McBlain passed away in the hospital 2 days later. According to the Chief Inspector of the Division of Criminal Investigation, the victims were deliberately run over in a calculated, premeditated revenge slaying. She added that McBlain's family and friends were left utterly heartbroken by the tragedy. Authorities conducted a major investigation that led to the arrest of 6 suspects in total. A 5-week trial began on January the 4th of 2021 and concluded with only 5 convictions, as one suspect was still a minor. Quayham and Connolly were found guilty of murder and attempted murder. They were sentenced to life with minimum terms of 20 and 14 years respectively. Poynton and one of the occupants of the car used during the incident, 27-year-old Joshua Titterington, were found guilty of murder and attempted grievous bodily harm and were sentenced to life with minimum terms of 13 years and 17.5 years respectively. Finally, Chatwood was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to 14 years behind bars. Number 8. Brian Werner. A fight over a debt ended in the death of a 29-year-old man in the Argentinian port city of Bahia Blanca on June the 13th of 2022. Brian Werner worked for the city's park department alongside his grandfather, 77-year-old Domingo, to whom he reportedly owed money. The dispute culminated outside the latter's residence, where surveillance cameras captured Brian charging at his grandfather while his girlfriend, Aldana Soria, was dragged to the ground and clinging to his legs in an attempt to stop him. The younger Werner swung a broomstick and repeatedly punched the other man before Soria was eventually able to restrain him. The footage showed Werner when he returned a few hours later and started kicking his grandfather's door. Domingo then slightly opened the door and emptied the barrel of a revolver into Brian's body. He was sent tumbling over a row of plants after being shot in the cheek, neck, shoulder, chest, and abdomen, resulted in fatal injuries. Domingo appeared before a magistrate and was granted release from prison after the court had taken into account the penalty provided by law for this crime and the advanced age of the accused. Domingo's daughter, who was the deceased's mother, claimed that her son suffered from mental illness since childhood and had recently stopped taking his pills. She also described her father as an abuser who'd beaten her while she was pregnant and who'd been stalking and harassing Brian over the debt. Number 7. Greta Vildred. Roughly a month after making a social media post targeting President Vladimir Putin, a 23-year-old Russian model went missing. In January of 2021, Greta Vildred inferred that the state leader was a psychopath, predicting that his campaign to improve Russia's integrity would end in tragedy, foreshadowing the events in Ukraine. There were initial concerns that the 23-year-old's decision to speak out against the regime's policies was connected to her disappearance. However, over a year later, in the spring of 2022, her boyfriend confessed to killing her. Dmitry Korovin, who was also in his early 20s, claimed that he and Vildred had argued over money at a hotel in Moscow. The man struggled with drug addiction and would often borrow money from Vildred, who reportedly worked as an escort, without paying her back. The row violently escalated to the point that the intoxicated Korovin strangled the model to death. For 3 nights he slept in the same room with the corpse, before stuffing it in a newly bought suitcase. Korovin then drove 300 miles to the Lipetsk region and abandoned Vildred's remains in the trunk of a car in the garage of his parents' home. He kept posting to her social media to maintain the illusion that she was still alive, but was eventually discovered. Footage later emerged of Vildred predicting her grisly fate. Prior to the murder, she'd recorded herself in the hotel, naming Korovin as her future killer. The model mentioned in the recording that even though she'd been screaming and was threatened with murder, no one had intervened to help her. Number 6. Chloe Palmer. On November the 24th of 2017, English teenager Kristalla Amphlett was the designated driver in a group of 4 that had gone on a girls' night out in Watford. They'd left one of the town's clubs at around 3:30 a.m. and headed north along the M1 towards St Albans. Amphlett then started arguing over petrol money with passenger Maisie O'Flynn, who sat in the back seat of her Renault Twingo next to 19-year-old Chloe Palmer. As tensions escalated, Amphlett became angry at the other women and pulled the car over on the hard shoulder of the M1, reportedly without any illumination or hazard lights flashing. She switched the engine off, opened her door, and turned with her legs hanging out of the car as she continued bickering with O'Flynn. Keziah Knight, who'd been sitting in the front passenger seat, got out and leaned on a metal safety barrier. As the women continued arguing, an Isuzu D-Map plowed into the back of the Werner. Amphlett and O'Flynn both suffered serious injuries, but ultimately survived. Palmer was left with a pulmonary contusion, a complex pelvic fracture, a broken left leg, and an acute brain injury. She succumbed to complications stemming from the latter after 6 days in the hospital. During the legal proceedings that followed, the driver of the Isuzu, whom evidence indicated had fallen asleep behind the wheel, admitted causing death by dangerous driving and was jailed for 30 months. Amphlett was also considered to have been responsible for her friend's death. Due to her decision to pull the car over under unsafe circumstances, she, however, pleaded not guilty to causing death and injury by dangerous driving and was ultimately cleared. Number 5. Kevin Tucker. The body of 38-year-old Kevin Tucker was found in the shower of the Grand Motel on South Halsted Street, Chicago, in March of 2019. The man was naked and unresponsive, with water raining down on him while the television was blaring. He'd succumbed to a bullet wound to the torso. Roughly 45 minutes before the authorities were alerted to reports of gunshot, Tucker was captured by surveillance systems, checking into a room with 28-year-old Katara Chanel. The police would later determine that Chanel, Tucker's on-again, off-again girlfriend, had lured him to the motel while under the belief that he'd recently come into a large sum of money. Chanel was allegedly enraged that the man hadn't given her a cut and was captured on video running from the room after the gunshot had been heard. The woman then called someone to pick her up and was dropped off in the Little Village neighborhood, reportedly telling the driver that they could keep her car because she was fleeing the state. An arrest warrant was issued in early July, and the woman was ultimately taken into custody on charges of first-degree murder, facing a sentence of life in prison if found guilty. Number 4. Wendy Lynn Wien. Michigan woman Wendy Lynn Wien was given a sentence of 7 to 20 years in prison in January of 2022 after she admitted trying to have her ex-husband killed over a money dispute. On July the 17th of 2020, Wien, then in her early 50s, had accessed a website called Renter Hitman. It was a fake website created by California man Bob Innes in the mid-2000s as a class project. He abandoned the site for a few years but then returned to find numerous hit requests, including Wien's. She'd adopted a pseudonym when trying to solicit her ex's murder, but used her real information at the end of the service request. The woman believed she'd entered communication with potential assassin Guido Fanelli, but instead she was giving her information to Innes, who alerted Michigan State Police. An undercover agent then pretended to be from Renter Hitman and arranged a meeting with Wien. The woman agreed to pay $5,000 for the hit, also providing the detective with her ex's home address, work address, and phone number. Wien was arrested after a second meeting later in the day, during which she gave the undercover agent a $200 down payment. Later on, she pleaded guilty to solicitation of murder and using a computer to commit a crime. Number 3. Loretta Saunders. In January of 2014, couple Blake Leggett and Victoria Henneberry, both in their late 20s, moved to Halifax, Canada and sublet a room in an apartment leased by university student Loretta Saunders. The couple ran into financial difficulties soon after the move. On February the 13th, Saunders went to collect the rent from them, but Leggett and Henneberry claimed they didn't have the money. The latter lied by saying that she'd lost her card and needed to contact her bank. 26-year-old Saunders remained on the couch as Leggett crept behind her. He placed a plastic bag over the young woman's head, attempting to suffocate her. She fought back and managed to tear through the plastic before she and her aggressor ended up on the floor of the dining room. Leggett then slammed Saunders' head into the floor until she stopped moving. He then wrapped her head in plastic, placed her body in a hockey bag, and fled Nova Scotia with Henneberry. They drove the victim's car and used her bank card to buy supplies for the trip. Henneberry also pretended to be Saunders while trying to get a password from her boyfriend, with one of the texts reading, "I'm so stressed that I can't even remember my own mother's maiden name." The couple stopped the car during a snowfall and hid the body in a wooded area adjacent to the Trans-Canada Highway near Salisbury. Within 5 days of the killing, they were arrested in Harrow, Ontario, while they were still in Saunders' car and also in possession of her ID, phone and bank card. In 2015, Leggett pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and Henneberry pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Applause echoed throughout a Halifax courtroom as both were sentenced to life in prison, with a parole available after 25 and 10 years respectively. Number 2. Robert Mitchell Williams. In late October of 2019, a man was gunned down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, following a money dispute with his cousin. Roughly half an hour after midnight, on October the 29th, law enforcement arrived at Monish Park at 15th Street and Black Bears Way. They found the victim, 36-year-old Rashad Ritchie, with multiple gunshot injuries and rushed him to DCH Regional Medical Center, where he ultimately passed away. The shooter, identified as 40-year-old Robert Mitchell Williams, was taken into custody by the Tuscaloosa Violent Crimes Unit, with his bond set at $150,000. His initial charge of attempted murder was upgraded following Ritchie's death, and the authorities reported that he had prior convictions for second-degree assault and robbery. The details of the violent incident, including the amount of money over which the men had been feuding, weren't disclosed in the immediate aftermath. Number 1. Paula and Dawn. In the summer of 2021, Las Vegas man Arnaldo Lozano Sanchez was feuding with his tenants over unpaid rent and told a neighbor that he wanted to avoid the eviction process and handle it his way. He went inside the single-story pink house that he owned and started to indiscriminately gun down his renters. Witness Carlos Lopez claimed that he and his girlfriend Paula were staying in one of the rooms, which the woman had left shortly before the shooting started. After Lopez heard gunfire, he opened the door and saw Lozano Sanchez standing in the hallway, smiling and laughing. He then told another of the renters, Seferino Reyes, that he couldn't run from him anymore and forced his way into the room that he'd rented with his girlfriend Dawn. She was shot and killed while Reyes was shot 9 times, but survived. Lopez, who wasn't injured in the landlord's rampage, started running from the house, at which point he found his girlfriend bleeding in the driveway from gunshot injuries that ultimately proved fatal. Lozano Sanchez was arrested, but refused to talk to detectives asking for an attorney, and, as of the latest updates, he was denied bail and awaited a trial date.
Thanks for watching. Would you rather get $10,000 right now or get $1,000 a month for 10 months? Let us know in the comments section below.